Hello, everybody. Doing a quick impromptu live stream here because I was thinking about just recording a video on the status of impeachment and what impeachment will actually occur, or impeachment proceedings will occur. But I figured might as well just do a live stream and see what happens, even though that it's Saturday afternoon, and you'd think most people would have something better to do than to watch a live stream where they simply stare at my face for an unspecified period of time. But nonetheless, yesterday was something of a watershed moment, but it didn't really get portrayed as such, which is odd because if you watched the press conference yesterday held by Jerrold Nadler, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, you couldn't come away with that with anything but relative certainty that impeachment proceedings are underway. And I'm not saying it's going to result ultimately in articles of impeachment being drafted or voted on, or much less being approved by the House of Representatives. But Jerrold Nadler and his colleagues on the House Judiciary Committee made clear that they are now in an impeachment posture. And I'll just read to you what Nadler said. And Nadler is the person who is the most central figure in this whole drama in terms of impeachment, aside from Nancy Pelosi. And arguably, Nadler's even more integral to the impeachment process. Nadler said that, quote, "The committee is exercising its authority to investigate all these scandals and to decide what to do about them, which could include articles of impeachment." And that was enshrined in a court filing that they submitted on the same day to obtain grand jury information that had been redacted in the Mueller report. So they didn't just spout off on that at a press conference. It's actually part of their legal strategy now, is to say that we are now endeavoring to determine whether articles of impeachment should be drafted. And now there's a whole semantic question as to whether that constitutes an impeachment inquiry. But if you're saying officially and formally that your ultimate objective is to determine whether articles of impeachment should be drafted, what is that if not an impeachment inquiry or an impeachment investigation? In fact, Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland said it bluntly yesterday, quote, "We are in an impeachment investigation." Now, they're trying to have it both ways to some extent, where they don't want to overly dramatize the fact that they are now in an impeachment posture. Maybe because of some political considerations as to what pressure that might place on other members of the Democratic caucus. But semantics aside, just look at the rationale that they put forward for what they are now doing. They are in an impeachment posture. Okay, they are inquiring, quote unquote, as to whether they will pursue impeachment as the ultimate remedy for the problem that they perceive to be at hand. Now, I couldn't be more clear that I don't believe that the logic behind their determination that there is a problem at hand is valid. I think it's just the product of this long-standing confabulation that Democrats have been so committed to for so long that they can't move beyond it. And for people who watched the Mueller hearings on Wednesday and concluded, as I did, that Mueller's performance was totally embarrassing, he didn't have his bearings about him, he failed to demonstrate just a basic grasp of the facts that supposedly were included in his report that he supposedly drafted. On numerous occasions, he shot down Democratic attempts for him to dramatize the report, which was supposedly the whole reason why they brought him there in the first place, to, quote, breathe life into the text of the report and engage in this kind of show where he would stridently declare how awful he thought that Trump's purported misdeeds were. But on numerous occasions, he didn't even read aloud quotes from the report when he was prompted to do so. And he also said several times that he could not endorse the characterization put forward of various events described in the report by Democrats. So it was a failure in the sense that it didn't achieve the very immediate optical goals that Democrats wanted. But I said this right away when just after the hearings were underway. You shouldn't conflate that optical failure with a failure in terms of increasing the momentum for impeachment among House Democrats, because that really is the key metric for deciphering whether impeachment is forthcoming. The audience that wanted Mueller to perform in a certain way were Democrats who were already committed to impeachment and wanted to bolster their case. And also, there were some procedural issues because people like Nadler, who privately supports impeachment and has been lobbying for it, wanted a certain procedural trajectory where they didn't preempt Mueller and call for an impeachment inquiry prior to him testifying. They felt that was a necessary step to build a case that would actually precede the actual initiation of impeachment proceedings. And it might not have been dramatic. It might not have gotten the headlines weirdly that it probably ought to have. But 2 days or after the Mueller testimony, Nadler essentially confirmed, surrounded by his colleagues who all support impeachment proceedings. It was interesting because if you watched the press conference yesterday, Nadler was the only one on stage who hasn't publicly said he supports impeachment proceedings yet. He's gestured toward that. He's basically all but called for it without using that precise wording, but he was surrounded by people on the Judiciary Committee who all support it. And the inference there should be that they have won the day because they got Nancy Pelosi to endorse language that Nadler himself described as, in effect, amounting to an impeachment proceeding. And look at what happened after the testimony. It didn't derail impeachment fervor. It heightened it. And that's because there's a certain segment of the electorate, namely within the Democratic Party, that is steadfastly committed to pursuing this line of opposition to Trump. And they weren't going to be dissuaded by Mueller looking like he just rolled out of bed or that his mental faculties had diminished. There was actually a Washington Post story today, I think, or last night, about how rumors had swirled that Mueller has having cognitive issues, or that his acuity had decreased, and therefore some Democrats were worried that he might not put on the performance that they wanted him to. And sure enough, he did not. He couldn't recall basic facts contained in the report. And it's not to say that it would necessarily be fair to expect Mueller to have a sweeping, intricate, absolutely 100% adroit knowledge of every single facet of his report and investigation, but he had little grasp of even the most basic tenets of the investigation, such as when he was pressed by Doug Collins of Georgia about a key piece of legal reasoning that was in Volume 1, page 180. I happen to have that memorized, about specifying that Mueller, understood his investigative ambit to encompass collusion because he said in legal dictionaries, collusion is regarded as synonymous or largely synonymous with conspiracy, and therefore he investigated collusion. He had no familiarity with that key line. And that's something that you would think he, as the lead figure in this investigation, would at least at least if you rekindled his memory, he would be aware of. But he didn't have. It's almost as if he hadn't read it. And yeah, he's turning 75 in August, so people usually aren't at the top of their game when they age to that level, at least compared to earlier in their lifespan. But you would think, at least with some minimal preparation, he would have been familiar with as key of a passage as that. And he was not. But then again, it doesn't particularly matter in terms of the political incentives around impeachment. So since Mueller's testimony, momentum didn't decrease. Rather, you had 6, maybe 7 new members of the House of Representatives endorse impeachment proceedings overtly since the testimony. One of them was especially significant, and that was Representative Katherine Clark of Massachusetts, who is the senior-most official now in the Democratic caucus to call for impeachment proceedings. And she would not have done that if it wasn't endorsed, or if it wasn't at least tacitly supported by the rest of the leadership. And sure enough, Pelosi's attitude has changed on impeachment, where she basically gave her blessing for any member to back it, given whatever their political calculation is. Katherine Clark is the vice chair of the House Democratic Caucus, so she's involved very much in the strategy of the caucus. And 2 others were also significant. Again, remember, these are all post-Mueller testimony. Chris Pappas of New Hampshire came out and backed it, and he represents a Republican-leaning district in New Hampshire. And he's somebody who the DCCC, which is the campaign wing of the Democratic caucus in the House, has identified as a key incumbent that needs to be protected and backed, given the lean of his district. And another was Mike Levin of California, who also represents a GOP-leaning district and succeeded Darrell Issa, the longtime Republican representative from San Diego County. So those are not people in like deep blue districts who have nothing to lose should impeachment backfire. Those are people who actually, if you're in that kind of district, almost everything you do is geared toward making yourself maximally electable for the next election cycle, because a little shift in political sentiment nationally could mean office. So the total number of House Democrats now openly supporting impeachment, and remember, we've always been told that there are many more privately supporting it, but the number publicly supporting it is now at 101 at least, and it could be as many as 105. So to make a majority in the caucus, you just need around 10 or 15 more. And that, I think, is the main reason why you saw Pelosi's language soften on impeachment. And she now seems to view it as a potentially legitimate option in the short term, in terms of pursuing this matter even further. So a couple months ago, I speculated that Pelosi basically always saw impeachment proceedings as an inevitability, and it was just a matter of time or timing. And initiating the proceedings now, timing-wise, would be terrible. July, August, those are down periods in terms of the public paying attention to news. That was reflected in the relatively poor ratings that the Mueller hearing generated this week. People are relatively tuned out over the summer for obvious reasons. So if you were going to initiate impeachment proceedings, you'd want to do it in a time when more people are going to be tuned in, which would be after Labor Day. So now you had a precursor where Nadler basically confirmed that they were in an impeachment posture. He doesn't use the word impeachment inquiry because he has a semantic quibble, but it doesn't really matter. They are now confirming that they are pursuing an investigation to determine whether articles of impeachment should be drafted, which is, in essence, an impeachment inquiry. And Nadler himself said it was, in effect, an impeachment inquiry. So one of the long-standing themes of my discussions of the whole Russia matter going back years is, when is this going to end? I have always tried to dispel any notion that it was going to end anytime soon, even when there were times when public attention seemed to drop somewhat. So obviously, there were certain times where it peaked. In March and April of this year was probably one of the most intense peaks after the Mueller report was submitted, and then the report came out. And then, within the past month or so, there have been other issues that have been top of the public mind, immigration, and so forth. And it was always kind of simmering behind the surface. And actually, a steady trickle of new Democratic members of Congress had endorsed impeachment proceedings while the media was largely preoccupied with other stuff. And, we're reaching now a critical mass where if you have half of the Democratic caucus openly calling for impeachment proceedings, there's no way to, the boat now is going down the lane in the water to a point where you can't steer in a different direction. The momentum has already built up to the point that you can't really change its destination. So I've always viewed at least impeachment proceedings as something of an inevitability. And I would argue that I've been vindicated in that, because they've now, in essence, or in effect, quote Nadler, initiated impeachment proceedings in the House Judiciary Committee. And it had nothing to do with Mueller's lackluster performance. I mean, that was only, if that was a setback at all, it was minor. It didn't change the fundamental direction that this was heading in. So I expect impeachment to dominate the agenda politically for the next at least couple months. It's probably going to peak, I would say, in September, October. And given what Nadler says Trump is guilty of, how could he then not recommend articles of impeachment? The logic I don't agree with, meaning the logic which says that Trump committed these high crimes, I dispute. But if you affirm, as Nadler does, and as so many other Democrats do, that Trump did commit these acts, then it has to flow from that logically that you would pursue impeachment. If not, you don't believe your own rhetoric. So if I've always said that the logical extension, the logical culmination of this rhetoric has to be impeachment. And that's why you saw a substantial uptick in Democrats publicly endorsing it after the Mueller hearings, notwithstanding Mueller's own lackluster performance and his inability to have even a basic command of the facts as spelled out in his own report. So I just wanted to let everybody know about that. One reason why we're on this path is because after the Mueller report was submitted and the report came out, and it was clear for everybody who could read and had an internet connection that there was no Trump-Russia conspiracy. Mueller actually methodically, I'm using the word Mueller as a stand-in. Apparently he wasn't even really involved in that much of the process, at least judging by his performance on Wednesday. But in the Mueller report that Mueller ostensibly authored, he methodically goes through and dismantles so many of the key planks of the broader Trump-Russia conspiracy that you would think it would have precipitated a reckoning within the political media class, in particular the media, who were so integral in egging this thing along from the very outset with all these exaggerated and unsupported insinuations as to the nature of the supposed Trump-Russia conspiracy. Nobody was indicted for a Trump-Russia conspiracy. No American, rather, was indicted. The Russians who were indicted are never going to be showing up in court. So it was really just a political statement on Mueller's part to even indict the Russian military officials for supposed computer hacking, whatever. But because the media, there was like a 1 or 2 week time span after March 24th when Bill Barr initially issued his letter saying that there was no Trump-Russia conspiracy, accurately reflecting the crux of the report, at least in volume 1. There was a 1 or 2 week time span where you thought, hey, maybe it's possible that there's going to be some reckoning given the overwhelming humiliation that had been inflicted on 99.9% of the media class who had been so central to pushing along this farce for 3 years. But then the media, what they did was, in order to shield themselves of accountability, they latched on to subsidiary conspiracies. So the first, if you remember, was the notion that Barr covered up the Mueller report, or he was acting as Trump's personal lawyer and didn't adequately present the damning evidence in his summary letter. Now, we've been over that. Barr did essentially accurately summarize the Mueller report. Mueller didn't dispute any of the factual premises in Barr's letter, and he essentially confirmed that again at the testimony. But that kind of gave additional ammunition to the conspiracists who said that, oh, this is just another means of covering up the conspiracy in a traditional conspiracy theory pattern. I mean, that's always what conspiracy theorists do when countervailing evidence is presented. They just say that, oh, that countervailing evidence is just further evidence of the core conspiracy. And then you had a seamless transition to the whole obstruction element, which is basically just a distraction. There would have been no obstruction issue whatsoever had an investigation not been launched on false pretenses to uncover a Trump-Russia conspiracy which didn't exist and was built upon a foundation of fallacies. But because there was no instinct toward self-examination or self-criticism, that was never communicated effectively to the public, except among right-leaning media. And right-leaning media, whatever you know, for good or ill, is not viewed as legitimate in much of the populace. So it's the lack of accountability, the lack of self-awareness, and the insistence on portraying what had been a massive and humiliating failure as somehow a success or vindication on the part of the media that led us to this point where there are still people who believe that it's a valid use of political resources to pursue impeachment on the basis of Russia. And you could say that it's all about obstruction. I've argued, and I will continue to argue, that obstruction and collusion are inseparable. They might be legally, technically separable, but because impeachment is a political process, the two are inextricably connected and cannot be separated. And in fact, when I was talking to the presidential candidates in South Carolina last month, I asked a number of them if they view collusion to be a settled issue, and a number of them said no, they did not. Kirsten Gillibrand, Beto O'Rourke, and others. And in fact, any impeachment inquiry, which they all basically calling for, except Biden and Tulsi and a couple others, they believe that inquiry should include collusion as an unsettled issue. And how could it not? It was a collusion investigation. Okay? So you can't therefore transition seamlessly to obstruction as if obstruction exists in a vacuum. No, it also always arose out of the initial impeachment investigation, the initial collusion investigation, which we now know, or we should know, was predicated on a host of fallacies and illogical extrapolations based on facts that had been misrepresented and structured into a narrative that really had no basis in reality. So it's going to continue. Impeachment is upon us. And when I say impeachment is upon us, I'm not prejudging that impeachment resolutions will be brought to the House or that they will be approved. I'm just saying that the key committee that is overseeing this process, the Judiciary Committee, has now made it clear in public statements and in court filings that they are now pursuing an impeachment investigation. And yeah, that's about it. So I know there are some people in the chat here. If you want to give a super chat, obviously that's appreciated. Maybe I'll take some questions or comments or whatever if you people want to. I know this is a bit of an odd time to be doing a live stream, but I don't know. I felt like doing it. So let's see. Somebody asks, will impeachment affect the election? I mean, depends what you mean by that. I mean, I think there's going to be a phase of the Democratic primary elections where this becomes, I mean, it's already been a dominant issue, and it's already discussed constantly. But obviously, when the House is actively pursuing impeachment, that's going to be a central issue in the national political narratives, and the Democratic candidates are going to have to try to kind of orient themselves around that state of affairs. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's going to affect, and it's also going to shape public opinion as to which Democratic candidate is favored, and that I think is a big reason why Elizabeth Warren has trended upward over the past couple of months. She was the first to vigorously endorse impeachment among the Democratic presidential candidates. She's obviously fluent in the Mueller report and the legal issues that are related to the Mueller report. So I think it's actually decent for Warren. And Bernie, for example, is less fluent in the Mueller report, and it's not as much of an instinctual priority for him to be fluent in that kind of issue. So that's reflected, I think, in his somewhat downward trajectory over the past couple of months, and the fact that he's stagnated in terms of the polls. And yeah, so that's the effect that I think it would have. So if nobody has any further Super Chat questions, I guess I will just keep this going for another few minutes or so. Of course, people are making ridiculous comments in the chat that I'm trying to ignore so I'm not thrown off. Somebody asked if I read the horrible Rise and Intercept Russiagate junk. I saw that came out, but I haven't read because I basically know what he's going to say. I mean, I guess I probably should read it just to torture myself. But no, I haven't read it because Risen's been terrible on this issue for a long time. Doesn't the full House have to vote to begin an impeachment inquiry? No, that's a misconception. There are multiple avenues by which the House can pursue an impeachment investigation. It's not spelled out in the Constitution how an impeachment investigation must be initiated. It can be done by a resolution and a full House vote. That's what Al Green, the Democrat from Texas, who actually called for Trump to be impeached prior to Trump assuming office in January of 2017. He's tried to pursue it through in a resolution, which keeps getting voted down, although 95, I think it was, Democrats voted for Al Green's impeachment resolution 2 weeks or so ago. But no, the House Judiciary Committee can simply initiate it on its own without a resolution. And that's what has been done. All right. Unless anybody has a Super Chat question, I'm going to leave it there. So this is your last chance. I know this is very exciting. Somebody says, enjoyed your Mueller testimony live tweeting. Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, the thing that there are still so few people who are not 100% conservative Trump partisans who would go through and live tweet something like a Mueller hearing with a skeptical eye. And so that's why, when I do it, it does get a fair bit of attention. Somebody asks, do you have any hopes the Bill Barr investigation into the origins of the Russian investigation will amount to anything? I think it will provide some useful information because there's been so little investigation into the origins of the investigation. Mueller steadfastly refused to comment on any of the outstanding issues around the origin. Democrats misrepresented aspects of the origin when they said that George Papadopoulos, one of the Congress people, said that George Papadopoulos was given a preview of the stolen Democratic emails, which was not even established in the Mueller report. So that was a total fallacy. The Mueller report doesn't even claim that Papadopoulos was told about the stolen emails. What it claims was that Papadopoulos was told by this mysterious Mifsud character of dirt. And it was only later that dirt was then connected to the DNC and Podesta emails. So in terms of Mifsud and his role, that's still very much undercovered. And the Barr investigation is seemingly looking into that. And it's odd because Barr said that the report would be out in June at the latest, and it's now almost August, and the report has not come out. So you have to think, I would suppose, that there is a lot of meat there that they're taking extra time to delve into. So I do think that there's going to be some useful information that comes from that. I mean, Mueller didn't refuse to comment on Mifsud in the hearing, even though Mifsud was obviously a huge player in the report. So this idea that it would have been outside Mueller's purview to comment on Mifsud was a joke. I mean, it was just obfuscation. And it's ironic because when witnesses obfuscate at congressional hearings, you'd think that the media's reaction would be, this guy's stonewalling, he's withholding information from the American people, he's an enemy of government transparency. But of course, that's not how Mueller was portrayed. He was portrayed as still this valiant hero who maybe slipped up or lost his marbles somewhat. But he wasn't really portrayed in a negative light. All right. Going once, going twice for any further super chats. Anybody doing anything interesting today? I'm going to go see the Quentin Tarantino movie. I haven't seen all Tarantino movies. Did I miss a couple of super chats? I thought I saw them. Any thoughts on the anti-BDS resolution? Yeah, I mean, I thought that was a bad resolution. Ro Khanna voted for it. Tulsi did vote for it, which I was disappointed by. But she's never endorsed BDS, so I wouldn't expect her to have a favorable view to endorse BDS. Bernie Sanders is opposed to BDS. Even prominent intellectuals like Noam Chomsky and Norman Finkelstein are opposed to the BDS movement as it currently exists, even though they obviously favor sanctions and boycotts and divestments in relation to certain aspects of Israel, namely with the occupied territories, but they're not in favor of the currently existing BDS, as far as I understand it. That's not to excuse voting for the resolution. I thought that it was definitely overly one-sided, and it took an overly simplistic view of the situation. I probably would have voted, if I were a member of Congress, I probably would have voted present on that or no. So I thought it was unfortunate. Thoughts on, will Huber be done before the election? BOHC charged. Huber is not the one. Huber's investigation, as I understand it, this is a U.S. attorney from Utah who was tasked by Jeff Sessions last fall to investigate aspects of the Trump-Russia origins. As far as I understand it, Huber's investigation is dormant. The one that's active is John Durham, who is the U.S. attorney for Connecticut. So just to clarify there. But no, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton are not going to be charged. That's sort of a right-wing fantasy. Sorry. Boris Johnson and Brexit. Yeah, Boris Johnson assumed power in the UK as prime minister on Wednesday, actually the same day as the Mueller testimony. I think that part of the reason why Theresa May failed so spectacularly was just because of her lack of charisma. Obviously, there are certain realities in Parliament. It's a hung Parliament, and she couldn't, and she wasn't able to bend Parliament to her will. But I think Prime Minister who obviously has public relations skills might have a better chance in getting through a deal of some kind prior to Brexit formally coming into effect on October 31st. Boris Johnson has made his central pledge that deal or no deal, the Article 50 process is going to come to a conclusion on October 31st, and the UK will legally leave the European Union. And Theresa May was never willing to go there in terms of a point of leverage. So I think it actually does strengthen Boris's hand. And I wouldn't be surprised if he does get some kind of deal. And so, as somebody mentions, he shouldn't be underestimated. I think he obviously has a lot of skill. He was elected twice in London as a Conservative, which is something of an impressive feat. And either way, I would, if Boris goes back on his pledge and doesn't abide by the Article 50 deadline for October 31st, and the UK remains in the European Union, then you're going to see a backlash of epic proportions, and Nigel Farage might become prime minister for all we know. Somebody says Q is the absolute bottom of the barrel in terms of right-wing politics. F the Q people. Yeah, I mean, that's not a super chat, but I just had to read it anyway. I'm continually befuddled by Q. I mean, I'm not befuddled. I kind of get the appeal of it. You can kind of engage in this first-person choose-your-own-adventure saga that happens to be taking place in real life, and it kind of gives your existence meaning where you think that you can be this kind of amateur political detective and find all this bombshell evidence and these little clues, and it's like a fun game to play. It's almost like a video game. So, I mean, I get the appeal, but yeah, it's a little, I actually have pity for people who are overly committed to that. Okay, people, I know I've said this before, but I'm going to wait another 30 seconds or so for another super chat. And Pokemon for political idiots. It kind of is, it's like Pokemon Go, where you can actually, graft Pokemon onto your real life existence. But with the political edge, and I think if you still think that I've been clear that I do think there was some kind of soft coup or some kind of genuine deep state, national security state, permanent government, whatever move against Trump that took its form in the Russia investigation. But so that's real. But if you still believe now that Trump is this valiant warrior against the entire deep state, you might have missed that sections of the deep state are aligned with Trump, and he appointed many of them now. So the narrative doesn't quite hold any further. And although there is reality to that narrative, I think that gets maybe exaggerated by the right-wing pundits and Sean Hannity and people. There is some legitimacy to it, but this idea that he's still this valiant warrior against the deep state who the army of Q followers have to support is ridiculous. All right, everybody, I'm going to leave it there. Have a good day, and I'll do this again at some time in the near future. Bye-bye.